Brad? We are live now? Okay. I'll call the meeting to order at 6:01. Roll call. Derek?
Here.
Nick?
Here.
Alan?
Here.
John?
Here.
Vicky? Yeah. Terry?
Here.
Christie's here. Pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the
Allegiance to the
flag
flag of the United States of America,
and to the
to the
republic
republic for which it stands,
one nation,
nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Alrighty. Do I have an approval of the agenda for the December 16th special school board meeting as presented for the truth and taxation?
Motion, Derek.
Motion by Derek, second.
Second by Alan.
Second by Al. Roll call vote. Derek? Nick?
Yes.
Alan?
Yes. Yes.
John?
Yes,
Vicky?
Yes.
Terry?
Yes.
And Christie's a yes. Motion passes. Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay. Share my screen here. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So this is a public hearing for the truth and taxation that we are required to do. And it is for the taxes payable in 2021. So this is actually, while we're in fiscal year 21, this is actually fiscal year 22 revenue. So revenue for next year is what we're going to be talking about. So at this meeting, it has to be held at 6 p.m. or later. It may be part of your regularly scheduled meeting. We must allow for public comments. And then we are going to be adopting the final levy here later on in the regular board meeting. And we will also present information on the proposed property tax levy and then also the current year budget. And so the agenda for the hearing, we'll go through the background information on school funding. A lot of this is going to be repeated information for you that have listened to this before, but we'll also go over the district's budget and then the proposed tax levy for taxes payable in 21, and then open it up for public comments. And that'll be after I present the comparison slides. So the Minnesota legislature must set funding for Minnesota public schools. And that is by statute. And so you can see that listed there. And then as a result, our funding is very highly regulated. So the state sets the formulas in which determine the revenue. Most revenue is based on specified amounts per pupil. It sets tax policy. It sets the maximum authorized property tax levy. So it sets the limit for districts that can levy up to, but not more than the limit that the state sets for you. The state also authorizes the school board to submit referendums for operating and capital needs for voters' approval, which is what we just did with the building bond. So the challenge is that the state sets the basic gen ed formula, but it lags inflation by, it looks like this year by about 7.7%. So we are behind about $503. And no additional changes have been made to the formula except for this fiscal year, which you can see was a 2% or $129 over the previous year that was approved. This slide just shows you the blue line is where the inflation would be at, and the yellow or the orange dotted line shows where we are currently at with where the state is paying us for ADMs. So you can see where that gap gets significantly bigger, and we are, it definitely shows that we're lagging behind inflation. So underfunding of special education is a huge problem for most school districts. As you know, special education is heavily mandated both by federal and state law. And the way that the funding is set up, it does not cover all of the costs of special ed. And so it is about 40% underfunded on an average in district or cross district. And so essentially what that means is that 40% of our general fund or more is picking up special ed costs that are deemed to be essential or necessary based on federal and state law. And so, when we talk about holding our programs whole, that is one where we supplement a lot of general ed funds. And it is different than a grant or things like that. So there's a growing dependency on referendum revenue. And this just kind of goes through some statistics. So for 2021, all Minnesota school districts have referendum revenue or local optional revenue authority averaging $15.70 per pupil. And so that's changed over the years. There used to be, a few handfuls of school districts that didn't levy anything. We were one of them. And now we do participate in the LOR revenue also. And so ours is sitting at the $724. So which is basically the minimum that every other school district is at also. So change in tax levy does not determine a change in budget. So tax levy is based on, again, we talked about the state determined formulas plus voter approved referendums. Some increases in tax levies are revenue neutral or offset by reductions in state aid. The expenditure budget is limited by state set formula revenues. So, when we try to balance our budget, we look at, our voter approved levies and fund balance, and an increase in school taxes does not always correlate to an equal increase in the budget. And that would be just because of the way the funding formulas are structured and how it kind of rolls through that way. So, so the school district versus the city county levy cycle, it just shows that, the city and county really does run a true fiscal year budget as far as calendar year goes. And ours runs, July 1st to June 30th. And so we just run off on our cycles a little bit. So there's some early revenue recognition and things like that we have to do as school districts. So now we'll go through some of the budget information. All school district budgets are divided into separate funds based on purposes of revenue as required by law. And so right now we run general fund, which supports all of our operations. Food service, which is strictly for our food service operations, including the staff that we hire through there. Community service is our fund 4. Building construction, we have that fund again with the building bond. And so you'll see a lot of activity running through there and a lot of expenses. Debt service pays the building bond funds. The trust fund is our scholarship fund. And then OPEB trust is the other post-employment benefits that are allocated via contracts and settlements. So this is just a copy of the district revenues and expenditures. And what it does is it goes through our fiscal 2020 beginning fund balance. It shows you the actual revenues in and the expenditures out for 1920, and then what we anticipate the 2021 budget to be, and then our projected fund balance at the end of that year. This will look exactly like the budget publication that you just approved after we did the second reading of the audit. Now we're looking at revenue across all funds. And so when you look at, our funding as a whole with all of our funds in our budget, we're up over $12 million, 12,376. And of that, you can see that 86.9% comes from the general fund. Food service is a 4.1%, debt service 7.3%, and so on. So it just kind of shows you overall where the majority of the funding runs through for the revenue. And this would be just solely looking at the general fund revenue and breaking that apart and saying, okay, what do we get as state aid, as state revenue? What do we get as federal aid? What's local? And then what are some other miscellaneous things that we get? And so by far, state is our biggest at 78.5. The local is going to be majority of your local tax levy, and some other miscellaneous funds, and then federal at 15.3. And that's crept up with just a little bit again with some of the new funds that we have again that are considered federal funding that roll through the state. So. And then when we look at the expenditure side and just focus on just Fund 1, because that's where all of the operations run through, we break that apart and look at how much go to salary and wages, employee benefits. So we're sitting at 48.8 and 14.7, which is pretty standard for a school district, considering you need all of your personnel to be able to run the school. Ours is skewed just a bit because we do purchase our special ed salaries and benefits. And so those end up going in the purchase services column. And that's sitting at just over $3 million at 28.3%. Supplies and materials, capital expenditures, and other. Capital expenditures are probably the one that varies the most depending upon what kind of projects and expenses that we're planning on incurring that year. But we do operate a 10-year plan, and that is approved by the board on a year-to-year basis, and then anytime we have changes made to that. And then when we look at general fund expenditures by program, this just kind of breaks up all those expenditures and said, where are you spending your money in program area? So you can see, again, regular instruction, special ed, vocational, instructional support services, administration, things like that. And so you can see those different percentages. But again, the biggest part of that pie is, again, regular instruction, which is our elementary education would be the big part of that. So now we're going to go through the determination of the levy and then the comparison and the reasons for some of the changes in the tax levy and what that impact looks like to taxpayers. So we'll go through some of the background stuff. So every owner of a taxable property pays property taxes to various taxing jurisdictions. You will see these on your tax statement. And on the next slide, it does show you a copy of that tax statement, which I'm sure you've all seen. But the county sends the bills, collects the taxes from the property owners, and distributes the funds back to the other taxing jurisdictions. So the county really acts like the collector of that, and then in turn spins it around and turns it back out to where it needs to go. This would be a sample of your proposed tax statement that looks something like this. They would have been mailed out between November 11th and November 24th, and it should show you an estimated percentage of increase. Again, be mindful of evaluation values and some of those kinds of things, looking at how that tax is made up and where your taxing jurisdictions are at. So each school district may levy taxes in over 40 different categories. Maximum levy amounts for each category is set by state law and voter approval. MDE calculates the levy maximums for each school district, and we get notified of those, and those come on our levy reports. So the key steps in the process are summarized on the next slide. The district only has control of one of those 7 steps in the process. So as we look at that, it's the city and the county assessor determining the estimated market value, and the legislature setting the formula. Step 3 would be the county auditor calculating tax capacity for each parcel of property in the county. 4 would be the legislature, again, setting formulas to determine school district levy limits. And then 5 goes down to the Department of Ed. They calculate the detailed levy limits, and then it gets presented to the school board, which is really the step that we have. And so, yeah, that kind of lays it out and just shows that there's a lot of different people that work with that whole process to get that back to where it needs to be. So this would be the schedule of events when we're looking at the tax levy cycle. So in September, MDE is preparing and distributing the first draft of levy limits, reporting and setting the maximum for the authorized levy for school districts. September 16th is when we approve the proposed levy amount, and we did approve the maximum. Mid-November, everybody gets those proposed property tax statements, property owners, And so those would be, if we levied the maximum, that's kind of what kind of increase you would be looking at. And then December 16th is today, and we are at the public hearing. And then following this, we'll go to the regular board meeting and look at final certifying amounts. So just as an overview, we're looking at a decrease from 2020 of 55,928 overall, or 3.9%. The reason for some of the changes, as you can see on this next slide, we got increases in the general fund of about 67,000 or 13.8%, a little bit in community service, and then a big decrease in debt service. And that's just because of, that 105, 110% that they levy. So this would be what's extra sitting on our fund balance that the state is going to take back. And we know that, and that happens typically every year. There might be one year where we end up with some positive dollars in there. But anyways, long story short, when you look at that as a whole, looking at a decrease of 3.9%. And again, so this just explains better planned decrease in the contracted debt retirement and principal interest payments after district receives significantly lower interest rates, less than estimated prior to the election of bonds sold as approved by the district's November 2019 election. So again, looking at that, when we got that big discounted bond, that helped us have to levy less from our taxpayers too. So this is significantly less than what we had originally anticipated when we were looking at passing the bond when we first started this process. So everything has really worked out well for us in that aspect, as far as things not being higher than what we expected, but being much lower than what we expected. So there's lots of factors that can go into impacting an individual taxpayer's school taxes. And so, value of an individual property, changes in total value of the property across our district does have an effect on different evaluations and tax calculations. Increases or decreases in levy amounts caused by changes in state funding formulas, local needs, costs, voter-approved referendums, and any other factors going on at the state for the most part. So we're going to go through the four-year school levy comparison, and this is just looking from 2018 to 2021. The 2021 amounts are preliminary estimate based on the available data from the state. Now, as the state runs their reports, this could change slightly, but I would not anticipate that unless we decide to do something when we approve the levy. So when we look at 2018 to 21, in the first column is just telling you what type of properties. So if we look at and say, the estimated market value is $50,000, in 2018, you would have paid $123 for that. In 2019, it would have increased to $131, and then in 2020, $139. So in 2021, we're projecting it to remain the same for that value of a house. And as you go through that right-hand column and kind of do that comparison across different values and different property types, you can see that we're projecting a decrease for all of those, either not changing, staying the same, or decreasing. And so so that is good. Yep, seasonal rec. I was just making sure seasonal rec is on there. So, yep. Okay, now we're just going to look at some comparisons. And basically, so we're looking at a $100,000 residential homestead property. It's just, again, comparing differently that four-year comparison. And so, we were up in 2020 and then down now in 2021 is what we would be projecting. And again, example 2 would be a $500,000 commercial industrial property. And again, looking at a decrease in that category also. And then we move into the agricultural homestead property. So again, that per acre value, and then the $200,000 seasonal rec property, looking at a decrease in that area also. Just going to briefly go through some credits that Minnesota offers. And so the slides kind of speak for themselves. There's some circuit breaker credit that's available if your taxes increase by a certain amount. There is a maximum refund of $2,820, and you need to complete the M1 PR for that. And then we also have the special property tax refund, and you can see, kind of the caveats for that. There is no income limit. Refund is 60% of the amount of which the tax increase exceeds greater of 12% or $100 up to a maximum of $1,000. So relief if people see some of that. And then there's also the senior citizen property tax deferral. And that is specifically for people age 65 and older with $60,000 or less for income. And so the next steps, the board will accept. I'm going to go through the slides, but we'll come back to public comment, and then the board will move to look to certify the property tax levy in the regular meeting. So these are some comparison slides that we had Ellers put together, and I like to just look at them and compare us across other districts that we kind of sit near. And so when we look at the total school property taxes with an estimated market value of $100,000. So this is total school property taxes. So this is building bond, other local levies, all of that included in one. And so we kind of sit in the middle in that graph. You can see that we're significantly under Ulen-Hitterdal, Norman County East, lower than Fertile and Winnie Mac. Mahnomen is just a bit lower than us at 237. And then when we look at just the voter approved debt levy and then the other debt levy, so just looking at school debt taxes. So when you're looking at building bond referendums, capital projects, things like that, anything that would sit in that in the debt levy section or in Fund 7, you can see. So the gray part is going to be other debt levy. So that would be like a non-voter approved levy. It would be bonding against your long-term facility maintenance funding. It would be borrowing in advance on some of those types of funding streams. And so you can see like when you look at Mahnomen and some of the projects they did, they utilized many different types of funding, and none of them was a voter approved levy. And so that's why their column is all gray, because that's other debt levy. So it's running through their debt service, but it's not voter approved. And you can see for us, then all of our debt is in the debt levy is all voter approved. So it's our building bond referendum. And then if we move to the next slide, we are looking at the voter approved referendum authority per pupil unit. And so this would include the local optional revenue that school districts have the option to choose, and that comes with the state aid portion for the first tier and the second tier. And then the voter approved or the extra above and beyond is going to be what your extra operating levy that you can levy your taxpayers for. And so when you look at Lake Park, Audubon, Norman County East, Ulen-Hitterdal, they're doing the minimal that we are doing, but then they are also levying an additional. So take, for example, Ulen-Hitterdal, an additional $1,463 per pupil unit on top of the already the LOR that they're getting. And so, that is significant when you look at, where most school districts sit. And there could be some differences in some types of funding streams and revenues that causes them to have to do that. But you can see we kind of sit, even Detroit Lakes doesn't have an excess operating referendum. So, and then this is looking at 1 acre of egg homestead property with the estimated market value of $2,500. And so, looking at where do we sit compared to everybody else. And so, we're right close to Mahnomen, Winnie Mac, and we're below Detroit Lakes. So not too bad. And I will go back to the public comment. Did the board have any questions? Sorry, I went through that kind of fast.
So I got a question, Michelle. This is Alan. And I was just, the local operating revenue, that adjusts every year per pupil unit, correct?
The amount doesn't change, but it goes by your pupil unit. So the
Correct.
more pupils you get, the more revenue you're going to get. Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Do we have any public comments at all?
I'm not seeing that.
No, I'm not seeing any.
Okay. Well, that is all that I have. If there's no other questions, unless you want me to go over something else or explain something else in a little bit more detail.
Nothing I'm aware of. Are you guys ready to go? Okay. Well, I think then we will, since there's no public comment, Michelle, we'll move to adjourn. Thank you very much. Good job.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Motion.
Motion by Nick, second. Second by Vicky. Okay, to adjourn the meeting at 6:26. Derek,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Alan,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Vicky? Yes. Terry?
Yes.
Christie's yes. We are adjourned. Okay, Travis, can you take us offline?